Good evening and welcome to the Bellevue School District regular board meeting of the Board of Directors. Today is November 10th and the time is 4:31 p.m. And at this time we call our meeting to order. We will start by roll call.
Jane Aris.
Director Christine Chu, I know, is on her way, so we will announce her as soon as she arrives. Seema Sarafan. I do know that Director Shui has a conflict for this evening and will not be able to attend.
Okay, Carolyn Watson.
Interim Superintendent Art Jarvis.
Okay, at this time, as we don't yet have our student of the evening, Xander Collins, here, we're going to go ahead and do a few other things. We'll start with my motion to approve tonight's agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. At this time, we'll move on to acknowledgements. So we're going to do as many things as we can. Executive Director Harrison, before your student needs to be with us, and we can think of some other things, and if we need to, we'll just move it out. We know that sometimes there's traffic that can't be avoided. So we'd like to just make some of the announcements that are relevant for tonight and for the month of November. This is Native American Heritage Month. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, November 11th. The 14th, which is Monday, is American Education Week. The 16th of November is Education Support Professionals Day. The 18th is America Recycles Day. The 24th is both the National Day of Mourning and Thanksgiving. And we welcome and celebrate all of these holidays. So at this time, if we're ready, we would love to hear from our student. Would you like to join us, or do you need a second? I think we're ready. Okay. So if Executive Director Harrison could introduce our student, we would then love to have him, as I understand, lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, do the land acknowledgement, and then give us his update. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sarafan. I'd like to introduce to you tonight Xander Collins. He's a 7th grade student at Tillicum. So Xander, come on up. Welcome. And you'll lead the pledge. It'll be up there on that big screen. Right. And then the acknowledgement, which will be up there on that big screen, and then it's your turn. All right. Thank you for being here.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic of which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just a second. Yeah, you'll see the land acknowledgement. So start whenever you're ready.
We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish people who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Warmis and Snoqualmie tribes. We thank these caretakers of these land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. I think that's how you pronounce it. We reflect on the historical context that brings us to reside on this land and accept responsibility to interrupt erasure. We commit to an ongoing partnership with the Snoqualmie tribe as we listen to learn from and lead with their guidance.
Thank you. So, Xander, it's now your time, and you can talk about whatever you want. So we're just here to hear from you. So go ahead. Just stand a little closer to the microphone.
As he introduced me, I am a 7th grade student at Tillicum Middle School, and the sweatshirt I'm wearing is me as a Tillicum ASB officer at Tillicum Middle School, and I wanted to talk about Tillicum ASB since I love it. I would say that Tillicum ASB does offer a ton of leadership skills, and today we had our Veterans Day Assembly, which involves people, if you volunteer to speak up on the podium in front of the school and talk about why you think Veterans Day is a very important holiday for the United States, and you earn public speaking skills for the school, and you earn leadership skills from ASB. For me, I was on the dance committee. You learn skills about coordinating with other students, staff members, also being able to do a little bit of manual labor too. Sorry. And then another part that I'd like to talk about is also the clubs at Tillicum Middle School. We have tons of fun clubs, as I would personally like. I like archery, since I prefer archery above my favorite sport. You can learn tough stuff from the classes at Tillicum we offer, well, that you guys offer at our schools. A ton of broad classes, the CTE leadership clubs, the CTE classes. You get a ton of skills from those. Be able to work with machines, be able to create beautiful pieces of art with the machines that you can create with, like say wood. You can make some nice pieces of wood art, which I made for my dad on Father's Day. And that's mainly what I wanted to talk to you guys about.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to come and for giving us such a complete update on ASB.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. So we go to item 2, and I ask for a second on my motion to approve tonight's consent agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion carries. Now we go to our superintendent for his update.
Thank you, President Seraphin. My superintendent's report will be brief, but I'd like to pick up where Xander left off. He noted the Veterans Day Assembly, and I would like to compliment the schools that collectively and individually all have very special recognition for Veterans Day, to remind the students and all of us that it's not just a day off school, but that there are those who sacrificed greatly. And for so many of our young people, it's their parents, their grandparents, and their relatives. So I say thank you to the schools for doing an outstanding job with the Veterans Day. I would also make note that our neighbors in Seattle have gone through a very difficult time, and I think any superintendent reporting to the public and the board today recognizes that it could take place in our district and our schools, and our heart and support goes out to Seattle and Ingram High School. At the same time, I would say to the parents, you have very safe schools. Thank you to the board for the last 20 years of updating the facilities and providing the sponsorship to have the vestibules and all the safety mechanisms and door locks, what have you, because I think the schools are as safe probably as you can physically make them, and recognize that we're still vulnerable. So we thank everyone for contributing to the school safety, and Mr. Doug James and the entire safety and security has excellent planning, training, and support. So my heart goes out to Seattle and support. At the same time, I can assure parents that we have a very good safety department taking care of the young people here. I'd also like to make a note that is probably going to be repeated by board members, but the interview panels for the superintendent search are open for people to sign up at this time, and I'll leave the details to both the website and others who can speak to that. But I would certainly note that those who are interested in participating have a great opportunity. Fourth item, last night I had a chance to attend the Superintendent's Community Advisory Council, and I think what I would like to share with people is, there is a group that is deserving of as many thanks as we can give, that represent the community in so many different ways, and we'll spend this year being part of that Superintendent Advisory Committee. One of the things they do this year, and one of the focus of this year is how do we do the best job to engage our community in Bellevue? How do we engage the businesses, the community at large, those agencies that serve children and serve community and serve our youth? And I think I will continue to say to the world that Bellevue probably has the best chance of any district in the state to create programs, be innovative, change, and many of those things you're hearing about, they're underway. But with the support of this community and with the people who either themselves or somebody they know can assist us in finding solutions to problems that have either vexed us and or dreams that people have on what to do with a good idea. So my thanks to the Superintendent's Community Advisory Council, and the schedule is posted, and Melissa DeVita can help anybody who would like more information about how to attend or listen in. Last item, I would note that this is National Education Week coming up, and it's celebrated throughout the nation, and each day has a special purpose. I won't go through them day by day, but a way of saying thanks to our educators, our staff of all ilk in the school district, and just a very brief opportunity to say, we're thankful you're here. We're thankful for people who give their gifts and their talents to assist our children. And there are so many things I could go on and say, but I'm going to keep this report short and say thank you, President Zarafan, and that concludes my report to the board.
Thank you. Could I ask you to maybe just say a little bit, as a superintendent who's been on so long, about the conference that's coming up, the Washington State School Directors Association Conference? For those who might see it, they'll see that it's listed that we'll all be there, or several of us will be there. If you can just give like 2 or 3 minutes. I know you could probably speak for 10, but we'll just take 2 or 3 minutes on the topic of what is that conference and why do people go?
She knows
that
me.
Could be helpful.
She knows me well. In this case, a quick start with the Washington State School Directors Association is a mandatory organization that all of our school boards and board members belong to by law, and they're part of that. But they have an annual conference, and I would say it's the conference of the great volunteers in the state of Washington that serve on school boards and make the hard decisions. This last 2 or 3 years has been as difficult as you could imagine for school board members as a volunteer position. And in that realm, they gather for this annual conference to look at advocacy, to look at issues, to train school board members, to try to share good ideas that are happening throughout the state. So it's really a delightful opportunity. It's in Spokane, and that's somewhat inconvenient, but at the same time, it is the one time a year where board members can get together from all the little districts, the big districts, wherever they come from, and share both the camaraderie and the training and the support that comes. So, Madam President, I would stop there and certainly answer more if you need. I can go on.
No, I think we're good. Thank you. So I think we're ahead of schedule, but we will move now to public comment. And I do just want to tell our student, Xander, thank you for coming. Don't feel any pressure that you have to sit here for the whole evening. I'm just going to give you that absolution, because I think sometimes we forget to tell that to our students, and they look like they wonder if they can leave. So don't worry. If you feel like staying, we'd love to have you stay, but don't feel you have to.
He did say that he was interested in the proceedings, so I kind of encouraged him.
Okay. We love having an audience, but we just tell you that we won't be offended if you leave. Okay, so this is item 4. It's our public comment. So in a second, you'll see projected details about our public comment and our expectations, which are on our agenda, and then as you see, they're also displayed. So this is the time when we receive public comment. I'm just going to remind you, you can also communicate with us by email or by voicemail. And we just want to start by saying how grateful we are for public comment and input, and how much we appreciate the thoughtful feedback and input we receive from our community. Because of limitations of time in our calendar, we generally limit public comment to 20 minutes, and we limit the comments of each person to not more than 2 minutes. And you'll see a clock projected up there to help you stay within your time. We will generally listen to all comments carefully, but we will generally not respond in the moment. Now, some rules. We expect our speakers to engage in a civil manner and not engage in any forms of communication that are identified as unacceptable, including slander and libel, invasion of privacy, obscenities and harassment, intimidation, bullying, or discrimination. We also can't accept public comment on pending investigations involving student discipline, allegations of employee misconduct, allegations of discrimination or harassment. And that's to preserve our ability to hear appeals. So let's end by just saying thank you. And you should know that while we'll be listening to all your comments intently, we'll generally not be responding to your comments right after you make them. Okay, so Ms. Worth, who do we have tonight?
We have Joel Ingraham is going to be our first public commenter tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening. Tonight is my favorite board meeting of the year, and the reason for that is the school improvement plans are on tonight's agenda. I don't think we can underestimate the amount of work and the insight that these documents that the individual schools produce as far as a reflection on the amazing work they're doing. I also, going through some of the SIPs, there was one elementary school that included some additional data beyond just the STAR data for 3-5. And in there, they included the DIBELS and the TRC scores. And for me, it wasn't so much that the data was included, but it was the fact that the way they talked about it and how they use it as a diagnostic assessment to really drive instruction for their MTSS process, and directly connected it to how they are changing instruction to meet students' needs and provide that tier 2 support, and also to reflect upon their tier 1 support. So for me, that was incredibly exciting, not only to then see the actual student growth, but to fully understand as much as you can from reading a document, insight on how that school is functioning, how they're operating, and the work they're doing on the science of reading. So thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize, I missed the agenda. If the school improvement plans are still in the consent agenda, my request would be pull them out because I feel they deserve that individual attention. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Jaden Drum.
Members of the board. My name is Jaden Drum, and I'm a senior at Sammamish High School. Today, I stand here to represent the Interlake Bridge and speak about my experience in and out of the gifted program. I switched elementary schools multiple times and went to Cherry Crest for 3rd and 4th grade as a general education student. Eventually, I tested into the gifted program and was a gifted student throughout my entire time as at Odell Middle School before going to Sammamish for high school. To this day, my closest friends were general education students that I met at Odell, which provided me with a unique perspective and is a large reason why I decided to leave the program. Within my first couple months of gifted classes, my peers that recognized me from my time at Cherry Crest made fun of me for getting into the program so late. I was told that I got into the gifted program only because of the lowered standards. And I realized the entitlement that a lot of my peers possess and how they look down upon the general education kids. There was rarely ever interaction between the gifted and gen ed kids, which never really sat right with me. While I did fit in with the gifted program in terms of academic ambition, I struggled to fit in socially. Instead, I was quickly accepted by the general education community. We played basketball together and had the same sense of humor. Unlike other gifted kids, they saw me as one of them, except that I happened to excel in school. We bonded over shared struggles, independence, and anxieties. During lunch, they would save me the food that they knew I wasn't allergic to, and I felt a genuine sense of kindness and belonging, which I've never experienced before. However, because of my friends, who I surrounded myself with, and the way that I talked, I was consistently the butt of many jokes in the gifted program. Some of my peers would exclude me from group projects, laughing at my suggestions and giving me meaningless tasks. They'd call me dumb and mock the ways that me and my friends acted. I speak to you as a member of the Interlake Bridge Club despite going to Sammamish. Although I've separated myself from the gifted program for close to 4 years now, I still deal with the repercussions of the hurtful words of my former peers. To this day, I still find myself doubting if I'm even capable of achieving my goals and suffering from imposter syndrome, and it continues to be a mental obstacle. Even though I wasn't a gen ed kid at the time, the simple association was enough for me to be grouped in and belittled. I hope that in the future, gifted kids will share the classroom with gen ed kids and see that there are valuable perspectives in those that differ from them.
Thank you very much.
Karen Kumazawa.
Hello, members of the board. My name is Karin Kumazawa, and I'm a junior at Interlake High School, and I'm also a member of the Interlake Bridge, and I'm here to talk about my experience as a general education student. I have been in the Bellevue School District for all my education and attended Highland Middle School. After coming out of my freshman year spent in quarantine, I was excited to meet the new people and immerse myself into the long-awaited high school experience. I distinctly remember experiencing one of my first assemblies, the ASB and class office elections. However, I was stunned to see the candidates and was shocked by the lack of people I recognized. I realized the leadership positions at Interlake were not representative of gen ed students at all. This is because leadership resources and opportunities are not accessible for general education students and are thought to be meant only for gifted students. I see this also in clubs as well, where leadership is dominated by gifted students, and in general, clubs are much more oriented for the gifted community than gen ed students. There being no gen ed representation causes me and other gen ed students to feel left out, but also pressured to be in the IB program. Additionally, the IB curriculum created problems for me and my peers. It was difficult for me because I was forced into IB classes when I wanted to take APs. The lack of AP curriculum at Interlake forces gen ed students into IB classes to gain AP credit, putting them into classes they don't want to take. As a member of the Interlake Bridge Club, I'd like to help build a school community that is diverse, instead of being dominated by one program. I used to be part of the ELL program, and to see ELL students and students from other programs not being included in the school community doesn't feel right. A community should be inclusive and supportive, and when only one program is highlighted and represented in leadership and curriculum, it creates an environment that can be improved upon. That creates an environment that makes the rest of the students feel shunned and inferior. I believe this environment can be improved upon. I think Interlake can become a place where gen ed students have actual representation and support within the curriculum and culture. As students, staff, parents, and members of our community, it's a matter of how much we want this change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Our next commenter is Christy Sweshinger, and Christy is commenting remotely tonight. So Christy, I'm going to click the button to let you turn your mic and camera on.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
we can.
Okay, great. My name is Christy Swessinger, and I have 2 students in the district. Joel and I have had many great conversations this week with many of our district staff, and we just wanted to thank everyone for listening and having community conversations about the amazing work that our district is doing for all aspects of education, but specifically for mental health and special education. The MHAT team presented this week to the Bellevue School Foundation, and it was an amazing opportunity for so many people in the community to hear how the program is doing and the steps that they hope to take to support all students in terms of struggles they may be having with, every area of mental health. So that was so great to hear. Obviously the takeaways for us were that funding will be key to keep those additional MHAT support for the coming year. I know that the foundation is working on additional grants, and hopefully we'll be able to provide some funding, but that's something that we really hope the district can put as a priority for next year, as well as additional funding for K-2 support. I know right now they only have 2.5 people for that. We also had some great conversations, bridging the gap between general education and special ed. Jeff Jorgensen talked last night with the special education PTA, and we're very excited about the vision and what the district is doing to sort of bridge that gap between tier 1, 2, and 3. So that was amazing. And I'm very interested in hearing more about how the district is approaching universal design instruction, because that will really support all students in our district. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I'm just going to ask Ms. Worth, do we have any other commenters?
I do not have anyone else that has signed up to do public comment. If you are online and wish to make a public comment, please use the raise hand button at this time. Or if you are in the room and you haven't checked in for public comment, please let me know.
Okay, so we're just going to wait 15 or 20 seconds to make sure if there's anybody who does want to speak, they can. Okay, not seeing any additional public commenters. We thank you all for those of you who came and look forward to hearing from you again in the future. So at this time, we will move forward to item 5, which is board business. And I think at this time, we invite Executive Director Harrison. And you're welcome to stay there. You don't have to come up. I think for board directors, just for you to know, Director Shuey had asked for a live copy, and that got emailed to each of you in case you want to have sort of a real-time editing or commenting within the document. So I'm just going to ask maybe Executive Director Harrison, if you want to project it.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
do that. Thank you for that. And I was going to say the same. This is we're going to try something a little bit different tonight. The suggestions come up a couple times around making edits live in the moment, which also serves a dual purpose for folks who are in the audience or observing online. They can actually see the work as it takes place, and it also helps, of course, with accuracy in the sense that typically what I need to do is go back and listen to the audio and read the transcript. So I'm excited about this opportunity. I think what we'll do first, though, is I'll give you the overview on the marked up version, and then Jess will put the live Word doc on the screen.
That sounds like a
for
good
the
idea.
conversation. Does that work?
Yeah, it does. Let me see
Great.
if other board directors, does that work for each of you to have him sort of first talk through the marked up version, and then if we want to use the live version, which was emailed to everybody, we can project that or not.
That works, Seema, but I just want to call out that the district decided to reboot my computer at this
Oh,
time, so
okay.
might take me a minute to get
Yeah,
on.
it's not a problem. I think the other option is Hannah has a live copy, so if you end up sharing a comment, she could put it in too. All right, so we start with maintaining professional boundaries. Thank you.
All right. So initially, the highlighted yellow section is what has changed since the conversation on Monday. But before I hit on that, let me just say generally the reason why this policy needed to be revised, and it didn't need a lot of revision, is because it had last been revised, I believe, in 2012, which was before we kind of anticipated the ubiquitous nature of social media platforms in particular. So the key additions here really address that missing element that we need to specifically talk about digital, boundaries with respect to digital media platforms. So the first sentence there, the change there initially was simply to strike students and families and community members from this policy. And the reason being is because this policy is a personnel policy meant to give guidance and direction to staff. There was a question, I believe, from Director Chu around volunteers, and it was unclear where volunteers sat with respect to this policy. And in part, it was version control, but I hope that it's been cleaned up here. Volunteers are included because volunteers are subject to the policy. They're not obviously employees, but when they are volunteering in our buildings, they act as such. The rules apply. The other thing I'll say, just to for the record, is that the vast majority of our volunteers, 95, 98, 99% of them, are only perform their volunteer services under the direction or supervision of district staff. So there's a couple of places in yellow where I added volunteers because they were not included in that second paragraph there. And then you'll see that I struck, since the last time you saw this document, where it says in the last sentence of the second paragraph, where it says employees and volunteers are required to maintain an atmosphere conducive to learning through consistently and fairly applied. And I struck discipline and substituted expectations, because to me it's really about the expectations that we have in the space of our classrooms and our buildings. It's not specifically about, how we apply, discipline. It just didn't feel right. So I made that substitution upon sober second thought. The other sentence highlighted in yellow at the bottom was feedback from Monday, and really around the word inappropriate. And the conversation, if you recall, was what does inappropriate mean? What's the definition of inappropriate? How do we interpret inappropriate? So there was a suggestion made that was completely in line with my thinking. That was to simply remove the word inappropriate. So the sentence now reads, district employees are prohibited from engaging in online activities or any conduct. My eyes deceive me. I'll read it from my screen. Of any conduct, my apologies, through social media that violates the law, district policies, and other generally recognized professional standards. So and then in the references, you'll note, and this is not new, but I did want to highlight this, a couple of additional references. I don't know why 4220 is listed twice, but we added cross-reference to our complaints policy, and the obvious policy that should have always been there but wasn't was our policy on volunteers, which is 5630. And then since the main reason for making revisions was around digital media and particularly social media platforms, we included procedure 68, 80.2, acceptable use of the network. So Dr. Thomas, did I miss anything from your perspective? And feel free to add to what I said.
No, thank you. I don't think you missed anything, but we did put procedure in there in addition to policy because you actually have two documents. You have the policy reference and the procedure reference, so that's why they're there. The other thing that I did, and something that I thought would be helpful, is I put live links into all of the references. I think as a practice going forward, I would recommend that we do that when we update policies and procedures. It makes it a lot easier for any of us to really look at what's the background information by doing that. So in the edits, I embedded that. And then the last thing that I think it's important to note is we did, where appropriate, crosswalk to the different collective bargaining agreements to make sure that we had language that was either aligned or absent of language that we did not inadvertently create conflict. The most important of those documents is actually the BEA collective bargaining agreement, because we actually, I think, were ahead of the game on that. Several years ago, we incorporated an MOU that addresses essentially professionalism, and many of these components have now a 6-year plus history of being in the collective bargaining agreement. So all in all, I think we've done an appropriate job of updating it. The feedback from the board was super helpful.
I do have one question, and I have to apologize because we talked about this and then I reread it and then I saw something that I wished I had brought up on Monday. So since we're still in a first reading, I will ask this and then maybe we can each go through if there was anything additional. So in paragraph 4, the last sentence, it's interesting. When I read it, it's like the lens you have. I always had the lens of the social media lens, but when I was reading the last sentence, there's two things that struck me. One is the word employees will discuss, and the other was, whenever they suspect. And I thought, okay, that's good. And says, including alleged conduct by other district employees. But I just wondered about the clarity of the language. And I think what I'm trying to go with is I would want shall, and immediately. So because this feels, so I will give my thought, and you might both have a reason why this makes you uncomfortable, but I feel like what we are saying here is if you're an employee and you see another employee doing something that you know is inappropriate with a child, you need to say something. But I could read this and not necessarily think it's telling me I have to. It's just telling me who I should talk to. And I might think it gives me a window of a couple months. So I want to ask about having language that would make it more clear that you have to, and that you have to do it right away. And so that's the comment. And I don't know if what others want to talk about, but that was kind of what struck me after I saw the changes.
So President Serpent, I'm wondering if Jess can shift to the Word document.
Can I ask a clarifying? I just want to make sure I'm tracking the right spot. Are you
Yeah.
in the second to last paragraph? Or
Actually,
the third to last, rather? Sorry.
third to last.
And it's that last sentence that says employees will discuss blah, 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 blah. So it does say will, including
know.
alleged.
I
So
know.
is the contention will to shall?
I just, it's interesting. I read it and I'm like, well, I would think that means you need to do something.
Yeah.
And I see Shannon's on. But I wanted to make sure people can read things differently. And I think will means you better. Shall is stronger.
I think I
maybe
would
it's
throw, if you want to say you have to do it, you might just use the word must, is what I was going to say.
Yeah, so
Must
I
might
guess
be
I
better.
should
That
may
was
I also just,
going to be
thank
my
you, Shannon, but
suggestion.
I'm not quite done. Hang on.
Okay.
I also think there's a time component. So I don't want them to, so I see whenever, and whenever in theory means the minute, but I'm not talking about intent. I think the intent is you need to do something, and we might say you're held to a standard that you needed to do something fast or right away. But I think since we want that accountability, I think we might need to tighten it up. And that was really where I was going.
I would suggest that we mirror the language that is legally required, which is no later than 48 hours. As soon as possible, but no later than 48 hours, which is tied to the mandatory reporting obligations that our staff have.
Can we get clarification, Shannon, on, is the 48 hours, 48 working business, like 2 business
It is
days?
48 hours, clock
It's
hours.
really 40.
It really is 48 hours.
So if we have a volunteer who has an issue that comes up on a Friday afternoon event, I don't know. So this maybe is not an issue for the policy, but the procedure. But we're going to need to provide some clarification, because one of the things that I would say is this paragraph needs to apply to both employees and volunteers. And right now it doesn't say that clearly. And the following paragraph, same issue. And then the last 3 paragraphs lost the volunteers. And that's the part where we have the reporting. And I think and it says we'll develop protocols for employees to report, but we need to have protocols for the volunteers to report too.
I would just identify that the mandatory reporting obligation is specific to our staff, and we can mandate our staff report, and I would align that with 48 hour, with no more than 48 hours from when the incident occurred, though obviously encouraging folks to do sooner. And I do think that both Director Serafin and Director Chu, I think you pointed out that will, shall, I think must is a really good suggestion.
There is one point that I want to make sure we're aware of, and that is this is a broad catch-all of potential conduct as opposed to more specific mandatory reporting conduct. So I just want to make sure we're mindful of that.
Can you help? I may not be catching the difference. Do you mind sharing what you mean by the other?
As an example, you can misuse social media as an example that is not a mandatory reporting item that may be a violation of policy, procedure, law. That is, just in my experience, more typical when we're dealing with some of these boundary issues than the mandatory reporting type circumstances. So part of why we made that edit at the bottom is just to make sure it was broader in that scope. Because many of the issues that we're dealing with within the last couple of years, most specifically, are not mandatory reporting issues, but ones that are important enough that we have to address.
So to that end,
May just add something that may be helpful here is Shannon's absolutely, accurate in terms of the parallel with the mandatory reporting. In the procedure, there's a whole section about reporting violations that gets a lot more specific than the policy language.
so I think that I really appreciate what Jeff says, and I actually want to highlight it and build on it. And that is that we hear so often from our students and even from some of our teachers that there are so many incidents that happen that are just not what we want to have happen. And they don't get reported, they don't get attended to. So if we had a culture of over-reporting for the next few years, I don't think that would be bad, as long as we're not creating something that we don't have the capacity to follow through on, because then, we're setting expectations for folks that we can't deliver. But I do think a slight switch to over-reporting from under-reporting would benefit us greatly and also just make us think more about, hey, maybe this incident that I normally would have let go, maybe I shouldn't let it go. Maybe that's not a funny joke. Maybe that kid is going home and crying afterwards or whatever. Or maybe that contact I had with a kid that felt like it would be appropriate, or that social media post I thought I could make, now I'm having a second thought. So I think, overall across the board on these policies, not just this one, I'd rather see a little bit more reporting. The one question I do have is, what is a reasonable standard? As Jeff pointed out, since many of these are not mandatory reporting incidents, what is a reasonable standard and expectation of time, especially for volunteers to come in and report? Shannon, do the volunteers have the same mandatory reporting requirement of 48 hours on some of the incidents that would be covered under here, or not really?
Only if outside of their role as volunteer, they're statutory mandatory reporters, which is often the case with mandatory reporters. For example, our teachers are mandatory reporters regardless of where they go. In theory, they have to report what they see at the supermarket. One of the reasons why I like the idea of must report to their administrator as soon as possible, but in no instance any later than 48 hours, is that may give the opportunity, based on what the administrator may know from somebody else. And the whole purpose of these policies is to put individual pieces of information together with the administrator who may see the bigger picture. And so what that person reports and maybe what somebody else reports within that same 48 hours may trigger the administrator's reporting obligation. And it may be that an instance that for one person would not trigger a mandatory report, but once the principal knows A, B, C, and D have all happened in the last 2 days, I need to make a mandatory report. That's what the intention of these policies are, and that
Got it.
encouragement to have
And
staff
Jeff,
talk with the principal. So I 100% agree that this is an area where over-reporting does us no harm, and it can really lead to the protection of our kids.
and just a legal clarification as well, can that reporting be through an online form or something, as opposed to having to reach out and connect with somebody? Can it be to a form that triggers an email that goes right to that person or something? Like, how easy can we make this as they go back to look at the policy? I just want to make sure that we can make this as doable as
The
possible.
The internal reporting, I can think of lots of different ways to make that happen easily. Unfortunately, for when it comes to that external, that next step, that we're going to sit down and call CPS together, or we're going to sit down and call law enforcement together, that still does have to be done by phone. But there are portals and ways to communicate these reports electronically that generate emails and the like. And I apologize. Part of this is my still being relatively new to Bellevue, but I can connect with John and Jeff Lowell and Nancy Pham and some of the other and Jeff Thomas, and talk about some of the different ways in which we collect these reports in order to make sure that reporting is easy.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
great. And I'm just looking at the procedure because I was kind of interested. It is a little more specific. It says employees or volunteers are required to promptly notify the principal. So it includes a time element, but it's not as specific as the 48-hour suggestion. And I do see even as presented tonight, there is still a lack of clarity. It looks like we're missing a couple places where we should include volunteers. So that's great feedback. Anything else, directors?
I had one, but you should go next. I feel like I did enough talking, so why don't you speak? And then I had one thought about volunteers, but go ahead.
Kind of newish, but so I was just thinking, obviously about the policy, and I think I'm okay with what you have there. But then that prompted me just now to look at the procedure, and I will say, my wondering is about the training, because back in the day of Vibes, when I was a volunteer there, I went to a training course where they went over this, sort of. I mean, they talked about don't come in with alcohol on your breath and make sure you're dressed appropriately. But they didn't, they didn't get into some of this that is actually quite useful. And one thing that I'd always wondered about was the social networking with students, which is D here, appearances of impropriety, Facebook, Twitter, Xbox. So there was a kid who just felt much more comfortable when I was volunteering with the grown-ups. And so he would come to the main office, during there was a break at International and a lunch period and chat and everything. And he sent Facebook friend requests to like a whole bunch of staff members and volunteers that he knew and everything. And I don't remember what came of it, but I remember the front desk, if I hadn't asked her, I wouldn't have known. The front desk person told me, the manager said, I never friend kids. But I thought like that was just her good policy. So what I'm wondering is, how do we train people on this? Because I think I saw during those years some teachers who I'm friends with actually friends with kids on social, like I'm not sure how much people know about this.
I'll just try to answer that really quickly.
Yeah.
With respect to volunteers, volunteers right now fall under Jeff Lowell's oversight. And really it's a school responsibility to train volunteers. However, Jeff's department has put together guidelines for volunteers along with training template so that we're kind of consistent across the board. And then this is one of the policies that our staff on an annual basis get reminded of in the in-service days prior to the beginning of each school year. And one of the other things that we're doing, Dr. Thomas and I will be looking at the procedure. The topic of social media guidelines is timely. In fact, we had planned to give our principals a training on Wednesday. That didn't happen, but we will be doing that soon. And one of the things that Dr. Thomas and I will be looking at is probably expanding what's in the current procedure. The current procedure needs to be updated as well, but we thought we would do one step at a time, get the policy revised, and then start to work on the procedure.
So, yeah, that's good. So my concern is just people just not knowing. But I will say what I saw was nothing inappropriate or untoward and nothing, nothing off color or anything, but it's the appearance and people don't know.
Director Watson, I've probably done this training for volunteers as well as employees over 500 times in the last 15 years. And at several school districts, there's videos that are still used to do this training for volunteers. And I have offered to do the same for our volunteer training and address those specific things like, what do you do when you have a student who's more comfortable communicating via social media? So I have thrown my willingness to be videotaped doing this training so that we can have a standard, consistent training that all volunteers get the opportunity to view. So that is definitely something we have talked about and thought about, and having it be specific to volunteers separate from the training that we give staff, just because they encounter students in a slightly different way. So it is something that we fully plan to address as we roll out the policy changes and the procedure changes.
Okay, great.
Can I ask a question related to that? Because what you raised and then you followed up on kind of tied to something I was going to ask, but it was a little different. It was, but training is better than just signing a commitment. But I thought, does that training ever follow with, I'm a volunteer and I sign something that says it's kind of like distilling to writing. In case while the video was going on, you were on your phone or something like that?
Oh,
Does
I will.
that ever
I think
happen?
that's a great question. I think John and I can follow up with Mr. Lowell to see what that actual process looks like. I know that for employees, yes, we have to verify that we have watched and understand the training related to these policies.
Okay, it's just a wondering, so thank you. I think Director Aris and then Chu also had additional.
I just want to make sure that I heard this correct. Are you suggesting that we put the actual time, the 48 hours, in the policy or in the procedure?
I'm recommending both.
Is
Just
it
to be very, very clear, and that way there's never, again, it also helps our staff members who might not be sure that it's a mandatory report or not, to have somebody else to run it past so that they know one way or the other.
With that, I would love to see more clear timeline guideline for each of the steps for our staff, because I think one of the things, I'm kind of reflecting back into special education. Every step, there's a timeline. And I think it would be a really good, just, concrete spelled out for every component that, it's clear. There's no ambiguity about it if in that procedure.
Oh, I'm sorry, Director Chu, did you have something additionally?
I did, but I think they're kind of in line with what these actual last two comments were from Carolyn and Jane. One is that on the policy, John talked about a little bit of the language and the procedure. It's really important, I think, as we work on reporting procedures, that we get super accessible about how it happens. So it's not just how the procedure is written, but it's that we have the tools in place to actually make it simple, that we're specific and not suggestive, but specific in what our expectations are so that people can be consistent. So I'd ask that, as Jane said, that we be as specific as possible when we can about what, how, when, where, what must be reported. And then the other thing, I was trying to look up the other policy that was the acceptable use one and then compare it to this one. And it doesn't, there's a hole, and I'm not sure how to understand it, but the social media hole. I mean, effectively what we say in our acceptable use is don't do social media stuff on our network unless it's for educational purposes. But hey, how you use your thing matters professionally. So I feel like, especially in light of some other events that have happened, we may be lacking in comprehensive guidance that we want to see, in what we want to see as professional behavior with social media. I think like drawing a line like is drawn in the acceptable use policy doesn't actually help us with this policy. So I don't know where the place is to fix it. I'm not saying we should suddenly say, hey, go use Facebook at work. I'm simply saying that we're also asking for professional behavior in social media, but our acceptable use doesn't describe what that looks like because we tell you not to do it there. So I think there's got to be some kind of, there's missing guidance. So I'd like to see that remedied when we pass this.
Superintendent Jarvis, did you have,
Mine is more of a question, Madam President, and that is, given the conversation, I think it's salient, I think it's appropriate, but it's also, as it touches on HR, it touches on the training, it touches on the policy language itself, it touches on the collective bargaining agreements. We can certainly pull this and take the comments and come back again if that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's a first reading, and I think I do. So I appreciate there's sensitivities around it. I did feel our board had appropriately weighed in on Monday, and we're having further conversation. We're not seeking to write the language at this time. We are, but I feel like this is an appropriate place to say what if, what about, and we look forward to the second reading. Okay, we're going to move on to, I think it's policy 5401.
5401.
Okay, and
So-
I am going to ask, I think since we're not really digging into that shared document, if I could ask Ms. Worth, if you could please project the red line version of this policy, but just, if you don't mind, make it a little bigger, because if you are watching it on the screen, it's hard to see. So as big as you can get without, I guess, exceeding the boundaries of the, yeah, thank you.
I'll use my computer just in case I can't see something. Okay, so with this one, you'll notice right off the top, there's a change to the title, and every time the word sick leave was mentioned, it's been replaced by the terminology general leave, and that's as a result of recent collective bargaining agreements that now use the term general leave as opposed to sick leave. So that's one significant change. The second one there is that last sentence of the first paragraph: when employees are ill or require time away from work for approved absences, employees have an obligation to use their protected leave. And that one is really kind of speaking to, I think, a lesson that we all kind of learned through the pandemic, is that when staff are sick, quite frankly, they should stay home, and they have collective agreement provisions that allow for that, and they should, and they're obligated to use them. That next sentence, district may require a signed statement from a healthcare provider, has been struck. And Jeff can talk a little bit about that, but just let me finish the kind of general, the general overview. Jess, if you could scroll down right there. There, the policy was missing basically guidelines from the Department of Retirement Services. So that language has been included, and it wasn't in the policy before. And then the same thing, there's been changes in terms of around the retirement system. So in that last paragraph, reference to Plan 3 retirement, Plan 2 retirement, that specificity has been added. And Dr. Thomas, if you want to add on, I'd appreciate it.
Of course, thank you. In addition to the change in language going from sick leave to general leave, it's actually a change that we've been making over the course of the last several years as each contract is open. And we now are at a point where we've gone through all of our collective bargaining agreements, and all of them now use the term general leave. More specifically, we really are trying to shift our approach to a more holistic approach around how do we support employees with multiple issues that they're contending with, and not be looked at as compliance driven and technical, but broader in support and in sending that tone. The other part about this is providing clarity regarding the incentive program that we have. And I think there was a somewhat of a disconnect regarding this provision, which basically allows for employees to convert their unused sick leave to post-retirement, a VEBA account, which allows them to have that money put into post-retirement insurance. So it becomes, we think, a really nice provision. And the changes that we made there were to clarify and update the various retirement plans that are covered and the conditions that are covered under VEBA. And then I think the last thing, Jess, if you could scroll back up to the top. We struck out the sentence, the district may require a signed statement from a healthcare provider. At this point, it actually is misplaced in this particular policy. This is not a sick leave policy. It's an incentive policy, and therefore it really is inappropriately placed. And so that's why we took that out.
Please, Director Chu.
I have questions. So if someone else has direct comments, it's fine to start with them.
I actually have questions too, so go ahead.
Okay. So I'll just ask a few questions and let you answer them together. where does our sick leave thing get covered? Number one. Number two, I realize that this policy is not where we're making decisions about how we are treating leave, that's made, at least I think, that is really actually being made in the bargaining. And this policy is supporting that, but it's not trying to direct it. But I still want to ask the question of, as we move in this direction, I want to understand, like there are purposes for giving vacation leave, personal leave, and sick leave. And when you lump them together, that also has issues. Sometimes folks are like, well, I have to use all my vacation for being sick, and so I can never take vacation, or, things come up. So my question that it boils down to is, A, since it's been happening for a little while, how's it working for our employees? And B, do we think that this approach is more comprehensively supportive of the overall mental health of employees than the approach we had before? And if not, is there anything we can do to adjust for that? Oh, we fixed the policy.
Okay, so I'll try and answer both of those. One is our feedback from employees around the term using general leave versus sick leave has been very positive. I think once employees understand what's changed and what's not, in terms of how do we know if it's working better, for our certificated staff, we'll find out over the course of the next year, because this is the first year that the changes that we made for certified staff under the BEA contract really are in place. And that is one of the agreements that we made with BEA. We're going to be looking at this during the course of the contract to see how's it going? Is it creating the intended effects that we hope to create? Is it solving the significant challenges that we've been facing the last several years? At this point, I think it's too early to tell, but that's part of what we are going to be doing. I think the other thing that I would add is that how we're allocating the leave is no different than what we were doing before in terms of accrual, how people earn it. That has not changed. The number of days has not changed. What has changed is going from the employee to have to report potentially 10 to 12 different reasons why they're not at work one day, to now that becomes many fewer. And we still have the ability to track key data, for example, the day of the week, the length of an absence, when an absence is entered or requested, do we have pattern issues, etc. We still have all that data and we can look at it. The final piece is we're shifting to more of a counseling support approach as opposed to you can't do this approach. So we're going from telling people what they can't do to how do we make sure we support and help you?
So you think that approach generally helps mental health of employees better? And people can still, with this current plan, donate to each other? Because I recently heard about an employee who was able to take advantage of donations of leave that were given to her, and it was so meaningful.
Yes, we still have, wherever applicable, we have leave share across the district, and that is one of the most effective benefits we have for our employees, and it's, I think, quite frankly, one of the best kept secrets we have.
I don't have any additional questions. I had one about the sick leave, and Director Chu asked it, and it was covered by me. So I just want to say I think it's great. So I am very pleased and feel positive about this change. So Director Aris.
I really like this idea that that's being implemented, but you also just said that you're going to collect data to see if it's working and if it's not. And if so, if you're collecting it, how are you collecting it? And will we be, if it's not working, will it be brought back to us so that we could fix this policy to make sure that we go in the direction that is best for our staff.
Yes. And we also, if we have provisions within individual collective bargaining agreements that we need to adjust, then we go through working with our various unions. Potentially we could reopen a contract to bargain. We could make a modification, enter into a short-term memorandum of understanding. We understand, and we're committed to constantly trying to look at, are we making things better? And if we find that we're well-intended but not getting the results, then we'll look at changes.
Then with that in mind, if trying to keep some flexibility of whichever direction you need to go in the future, do we need to keep this language a little bit more broad to make sure to allow that without being restricted too much by the language here?
The broader categories actually help our staff because they previously had limits. And when you run into limits and you have no more ability to use your leave differently, then you really put the teachers in a situation and other staff where they have to make choices that are not necessarily good choices. So, for example, I have to come to work sick, or I may tell you I'm sick, but I've got a personal emergency that I can't be there, but I've already used my personal days. So they may not tell us the real reason, and people having to not tell us the real reason is really unhealthy as well. So what we're counting on is over time, as we implement the shifts and the changes, it will make it a more accepting work environment for people to be able to say, I need help, or, I've got this going on and I'm not going to feel guilty about having support from the employer to be gone. And then the other is it's to help raise the mindfulness for all of us that our regular employees are the best people to be at work every day, especially working with our kids. And we want you here at work. We miss you when you're not here at work. So it's that kind of dual message about the value and importance of our staff and creating that healthier safety net.
So I guess what I want to kind of bring back to is I really appreciate Dr. Chu's point of addressing the mental health bar and that being incorporated into this. And so I guess I'm throwing this back at you, John, is there a language that we need to adjust a bit to make sure that we give that flexibility as we're moving forward in this year and we're addressing the data, and if we need to veer to a different direction, that is there? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I have one general question about the two policies for John. What's the critical criteria plan for these? How are you viewing that and balancing it? Because I understand that some of these are compliance issues, and so traditionally we've done a lighter review critical criteria wise, but I'm just wondering what the plan is.
Yeah, and in large part, short answer is no, but in large part is the work on these policies had been done previously. And, upon reflection and looking at the changes that needed to be made, it didn't really seem to us to warrant a critical criteria review relative to the changes.
But I can add, as we're looking at employee attendance and absenteeism, et cetera, we will look at multiple lens around employees that will cover many of the pieces of the critical criteria. And the difference is the critical criteria, as it's stated, is at a student-focused level. And because this is a staff-focused level, we have to make a little bit of an extension But much like we look at our staff through all of our demographic reviews, our recruitment, retention strategies, et cetera, we will do the same thing as we analyze and address attendance issues.
I
So it
think,
would be, I think,
yeah,
more
I actually,
indirect.
Jeff, I think you hit the nail on the head for the second one. Like the third column is really where the commitment is being made, and that critical criteria review, the place that says kind of like, how will we know? And you've got a plan to know. So I think like getting that, you know, putting that down and making it clear and transparent to everybody what you will be looking at and how you'll know would be helpful in some way, whatever you think is most helpful. For the first one, I do actually think that although it is about employee behaviors, it's about how those employee behaviors impact our kids. So I do think it's appropriate to have at least some thought put into that. I also think that for the second one, you could say for the absence one, that the input came from employees in the form of bargaining, and like the stakeholders, the relevant stakeholders gave their input, and the impact to our kids, in your view, is actually positive because it keeps more employees at work and it makes them in a better place, social emotionally. So that's fine. But for the first one, I do think there's it's worth the extra layer if there's a way to do that in some way.
Director, Vice President Watson, did you have anything additional?
Yeah. So how do I say this? So I recognize that this policy is allowed under state law and that it's a subject to bargaining. And there's all kinds of, I want to say, powers greater than I looking at this, but man, I don't like it. I don't like it at all, because what we're doing here is we're incentivizing people to come in sick, and they get paid out when they retire. And I think in this time of, pandemic and respiratory illness and contagiousness, this is not good. But I don't have a better solution for you. I've seen other companies or, employers with this kind of thing. It's very common where it's an incentive to come in, but I'm just afraid it's an incentive to come in sick. And so in that that red sentence, I remember I commented it on Monday and it got rewritten. I'm wondering if it could get rewritten, because what I liked was at some point it said, or started to say, when employees are sick or when employees are ill, they should stay home. And they should use their protective leave. I just would like to be a little more emphatic on that, because I just feel like this is just telling people to come in sick.
I do have another, though, point of view, and I want to offer it.
Okay.
Sometimes you were talking about sort of or I think Assistant Superintendent Thomas was talking about sort of that place where people are, where the reason they want to come in, they can't come in, is something that doesn't fit under a category, and they find themselves, lying. And I would say one is you're simply tired, and you're not sick, you're not going to be able to procure a letter from your doctor, but you need a break, you need a mental health break. And to not take that and to have to feel that you need to, like, there's no reasonable bucket for it, I think that is more likely to end up with people breaking down and feeling that they've hit a wall and leading to true sickness. So I hear you. I guess I have a belief that we can, I don't know, I think a lot of people have learned from the pandemic the value of protecting others through their own care of themselves, and wearing masks and doing other things to protect others. I don't know. I felt like we heard a lot last year from a lot of teachers that they felt that they needed more break. They needed more time away.
Right. But my thing
kind of
isn't
tend to
arguing
think this.
against that. I would think you could include your notion.
I have a couple questions for
But you're
Carolyn.
saying that you don't think people will use it because they will save it so that they can have it when they retire. And I think people want the time now. So I don't know. It's hard to know.
So the question that I have for you, Carolyn, is I have one question and one thought. The question is this a difference, though, than what we had before? Because my understanding is there's zero difference. We did pay them out for sick leave we're continuing to pay them out for general leave. So I don't know if your contention about the incentive system is about this change in policy as much as it is about
It was something I
this
had in the back of my mind ever since. Let's
right?
not
Yeah.
incentivize people to come and
if-
stay,
if-
whether they're
and-
students or teachers
Right,
or
I
whoever
got
they
you.
are.
And then the comment that I have is it may not incentivize the individual the way that you want it to, but it actually does incentivize the system in the way you want it to, because we have to pay for those days, whether you take them now or you cash them out later. So for us as a system, we are not incented to keep you from using those days. And so that is actually a good thing, because it is more pervasive and damaging when a whole system is incented to prevent people from using its care. So on that end, I appreciate it. I hope that the people will still use their sick leave too. I think we are so generous with our carryover policies compared to a lot of other outside employment types that also helps to de-incentivize the hoarding. But I'm not sure. Jeff, is that correct compared to other? How much do we carry
They're
over?
more generous than private sector generally, but we are very much consistent with other school districts in the state of Washington. And we do have state caps on how much sick leave people can cash out. They have a maximum of 1,440 hours.
And I'll just,
Director Watson, I do have a response to your concern that it's not in the policy, but I think it in many ways reflects your worry, because it's been our worry too. In the last round of collective bargaining, we have negotiated with our unions to remove attendance incentive provisions in the contract for those very reasons that you had shared. And we moved that into compensation, because we were finding people would come to work so they could get a $500 bonus. I'm like, you're sick, stay home. So that's really the second part of the alignment. The small, shorter, more immediate incentives that were in the collective bargaining agreements, we have negotiated out most of those.
and I'll just say that last sentence in the first paragraph, when employees are ill or require time away from work for approved absences. I mean, the thinking there is this is it's not a sick leave policy, as Dr. Thomas has indicated, it's a general leave policy. So what we're saying is when employees are ill or need to be away from work for whatever the reason is, they are obliged, they're obligated to use their protected leave in their collective agreement. So it's a way to get at that belief that we share, that when employees are sick, they really shouldn't be at work.
And one thing I want to point out is that the cash out of leave at retirement is actually at a 1/4 rate. And so it is not an incentive as far as if you wait until retirement, you're actually going to lose a lot of the benefit you've earned. And I think that is one thing that people have, now that they understand it comes at a 1/4 cash out rate. I definitely think people are seeing the value of using sick leave, and really, Director Seraphin, the I'm tired is a good reason not to come to work when you're too tired to supervise children. And I think that that's one of the benefits that I've seen on the legal end of this is definitely it helps address gray areas where somebody did not necessarily meet a definition of sick and couldn't get a doctor to verify they were sick, but also should not be working with children that day. So I really, I think Assistant Superintendent Thomas can tell you that I was really pleased when I saw this change, because I do think it helps us in a lot of legal situations where employees are able to honestly report that they can't come to work. And I do think it actually incentivizes people to use the leave they have available to them for things like, I'm too tired to come to work today, I need a break, versus holding on to their sick leave and saving it up for a surgery or for the idea of cashing it out at the 1/4 rate in the future.
I do know we could continue to talk about this. This is a first reading. I know we have time built in to have more discussion before the pre-board planning session. I just, in the interest of not shortchanging either our study session or our director session to nothing, I want to ask us to move forward to item 5.3. Yeah.
Which is, thank you for discussing my concerns.
Thank you, board.
Okay, I don't, is it Melissa who will speak to 5.3 or, okay, I saw the memos from Carrie Peterson, I wasn't sure.
Evening board, thank you for this opportunity. This resolution is a resolution that allows us to deposit funds from the leasing of property into the general fund so that it can be used to pay for maintenance, utilities, and insurance costs and other things associated with that property. Excuse me, as long as we have enough money in the capital projects funds to cover other needs. And so since we do have enough funds in those properties, we would like to be able to deposit lease payments. And the primary lease that we do have is on 3 Points. So that is the funds that we are primarily talking about here.
Director Chu?
What was happening to them before we passed this?
They would go into the capital and tech fund.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to make a motion, and I ask for a second, to pass resolution 2022-13. Is there a second?
Well, I'll second it.
And then you have discussion? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just thought, thank you for saying that it's mostly 3 points. I was wondering, what are the different things? There's like a cell phone tower someplace.
Yeah, there's a few of those. We have a
Yeah.
few cell phone towers at different pieces of property, but really the primary lease agreement that we do have is 3 Points with Bellevue Christian.
Okay.
What's the impact on our tech budget? Like, will we see a deficit or will we have to make any reductions, or are we are we sort of carrying at this point?
Yeah, our capital and tech budget, first of all, through the generosity of our community, increased our capital and tech levy last February. And so there's plenty of funds in there. The second thing is that with fewer students, we do not need to buy as many laptop computers, so we will be fine there.
Okay.
Interesting, because that's saying that the funding for the laptops didn't go per capita, but the other funding for the teachers did? Yeah.
I'm sorry, ask that question one more time.
No, yeah, I know. Most of our funding is tied per pupil.
Correct.
But the funding that pays for the laptops is not.
Correct.
That's what I was trying to say.
Correct. With the capital and tech levy, we're not limited on how much we can collect, but we are limited on what we can spend it on.
All right. All those in favor of resolution 2022-13, authorizing the superintendent or his designee to direct rental and lease revenue to the general fund in accordance to RCW 28A 335060 until there's a need to redirect to a different fund, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. We move to item 5.4, and may I ask, perfect, thank you. So I do want to just address as we start one thing that Director Aris had asked about, which was the Rainier athletes. And Vice President Watson reminded me that, which I thought was the case, but I wanted to double check. We had discussed last winter this topic, and I think it's still within reach. It's just I think the two of you started that work in a work stream to revise policy. I think it was 2021, which is on liaisons. So if you want to do that, that was the issue.
Yeah, yes, I think Director Watson and I did start this work, and
it's no problem.
And then it got dropped off. So
yeah,
we'll
it's
have
no
to
worries.
Pick it up again.
Yeah, and so I think it in theory it might get done by December 1st, in which case we could do it then. If needed, we could carry it over a meeting or two, but I think that's within reach. So it can make it into the approved because the policy enables it, if that makes sense.
Since Jane and I met, I'll bring this up into director discussion. I had some more ideas. Okay.
But are we going to discuss this right now, though, anyway? So
We
if we're
are,
going to talk
yeah,
about interest, you may as well
exactly. We're going to talk about it now. I do want to just make sure we know, we have a hard stop at 6:15 so that we have a little time for just a stretch break, which has been requested before we start with our study session. So, okay, so here we are. We have our opportunity to talk about what we want to do in terms of position as well as liaisonships. So we don't have Director Shuey here tonight, and so I can't speak for anything on her behalf, but we can start with, each of us. So I'm happy to start with me. I will be seeking a second term as president, and I would be happy to continue with Youth Link. I'm in my first term for each of those and can say that I've enjoyed both. So, Director, anyone else like to go?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I'm really invested in the ledge work right now. I'm in the midst of talking to 20 different districts to get data on special needs funding and doing a lot of advocacy work in that space. So I'm very interested in continuing that this year. My 2 liaisonships finished this year because I have 2 years with both of them. So I'm more than happy to see folks take them on. The East Side Pathways and also the Bellevue Schools Foundation. And I don't know, Joyce might actually want to do that because she was the backup this past year. Their next meeting, unfortunately, is the morning of the conference next week. So I don't think we will be able to attend. I'll check with Joyce if she's going to be able to.
Can I ask, did you guys attend ever together? Did she have?
Sometimes we were there together. Mostly it was just me. And like sometimes there was the communication on that this year was a little sketchier than it has been in the past.
And was it by video or is it in person?
It was all by video.
Okay. So that's the continued sort of way they do it?
Well, I think that I'm not sure that the way we were doing it was the best way to do it. I actually think that maybe if I had time to think and go back, I might have taken more time to meet with Juliet because she's the executive director one-on-one. I did that with East Side Pathways. I kind of alternated between some one-on-one meetings and some meetings where I was with the whole group. And I felt like that was most productive. And so I think people should, when they take on these liaisonships, feel empowered to make it work for you personally and the current circumstances and the people that are currently there, and just make it productive. So anyway, I people need to take those on. I'm open about what I take on. In addition, I would be happy to take on special needs PTSA, but I think that Jane is in her first, so we don't need that. I'd be happy to take on Jubilee Reach, but I think that might be the same thing. Carolyn, are you in your first year on that one? So you probably want to continue that. So I don't know what we need. Yeah, so I guess that would leave, let's see. I think that basically leaves me with PTSA, and Joyce is in her first year of that. So I don't know what liaisonships I should ask to take on.
Let me ask you this. I don't know that, well, we're speaking hypothetically is the problem because I don't know what interest she has, but I got the sense that PTSA is not necessarily a good fit with, because of logistics for Director Shuey. So assuming that was the case and she did not think it was the best fit, would you be interested in PTSA?
I would. And the other thing that I feel like we need to have a more persistent communication with, and I don't think a liaisonship is the way to do it because that's like too singular to like the board, like to one board member, is I'd like to see us have more regular contact and not suck up the time for our purposes, but be present with the work that the young representatives are doing. I think there's a superintendent's council or something that Patty had created, and some of us have been to meetings with them for various reasons. I don't know what that would look like, but I feel like the more touch we have with our young people in the district, the better off we all are. And I think so that's why I don't propose it as a singular representation. The other thing is I'm also willing to take on DAC again if that's needed. I subbed for that, but I also want to keep that as any board member can sub for it, because I think, again, it's more important that we all are able to step in.
So I'm just curious, as you were speaking, I was thinking if Directors Aris and Vice President Watson are revising 2021, maybe they could do it in a way that, I'm not quite sure what you mean about I don't know.
I don't
mean
have
about the
a
youth
vision for
superintendent.
it. I think I'd more like to ask the students themselves, how would you like to have regular contact with the board? Like,
Yeah,
do they want to come and present at public comment every month, pick one of their students to do that? Do they want us to come and listen in on one portion of their meeting and be quiet? Or do they want to have a regular Q&A with two of us here in a different?
I'm not sure about which group you're talking about,
Yeah,
because
that's what I was
between
about to ask.
ASB, there's
It's not ASB, it's not SOAR.
What is it?
Patty created a group with Shamari.
It's the Student Advisory Council.
It's
Oh,
called the Student Advisory Council.
and that's different from, like, there's a youth council, which is different from Youth Link.
Yes.
There's a lot of
It was
different youth
sponsored by the
groups.
superintendent or by the superintendent's office through Patty.
Yeah.
And it was created to represent all of our comprehensive high schools, and I think all of our high schools.
Correct.
And it has broad representation from each, like maybe 3 members. I don't know how active it is anymore, but I wanted to put the student voice back in here. Yeah, and as far as officerships go, I don't feel a great need to take one of those on, but I'm open to it if there is a need. And is there anything else on here? So I said DAC, Ledge Rep. I think DAC and Ledge Rep are probably the things that I feel, and bringing student voice back, the things that I feel like are really most important. And I want to strongly encourage people to be excited to take on the liaisonships that I have to leave.
Okay, the BSF and the East Side Pathways.
Yeah, so if you're not excited, let me get you excited, because they're good organizations.
Well, I do think your point about touch the way you can or want to is important, because I think that came up with Carol and I were talking about Jubilee Reach, and I was telling her I actually found the best was to just occasionally meet
with Randy.
Director. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was more effective than sometimes going and watching the meetings, and they'll talk about something really, it's very operational, and you're not learning anything, and interrupting to give a presentation isn't helpful, but I think sometimes those one-to-ones were better. And so I agree with you on that.
okay.
Go ahead.
Can I have a moment? So I was thinking about the liaisonship work stream and all this as we're thinking about it, and Jane and I need to get back together to work on it. But what I was thinking, and this is me, and Jane will have input, that there's a lot of organizations and we haven't got them all. You know, like we were talking about Rainier Athletes, now we're talking about Student Advisory Council. I'm thinking, I love the Backpacks for Kids people. And I was thinking, if we developed a comprehensive list of local, because we can't do everybody, organizations that help our kids or support our kids that we might want a relationship with, but then recognize that we have a limit because we're an all-volunteer board and we can't do all of this. But then what Christine was just saying, we need to go to them and see like what they need, like talk to them about what they need. So I just brainstormed a list of like possible 10 levels of need based on what I'd done before. So find out, like maybe some people just need a thank you note or one of those service buttons that I still have, or, you know, something like that, a certificate of appreciation from the board, just so like, hi, you know, we noticed you're giving backpacks to kids and we really love you for it, you know. Whereas somebody else might want like a shout out of what they're doing at the board meeting, or mention of their upcoming events, or they want us to subscribe to their newsletter, or they want us to do a catch up, or they want one-on-ones with their executive directors. But, you know, it'll have to be negotiated, because just because a group wants a one-on-one with the executive director doesn't mean that we have the bandwidth. But I thought we could do it a little more as a negotiation. And I still had, do they want regular attendance at their board meetings or membership meetings? They want us to give presentations once a month? Do they want us to take their training the way I think Eastside Pathways had? Do they want us to go to their annual offsite, which I did once for Bellevue Schools Foundation? Like, we have to negotiate it, but.
Carolyn, I really like the concept of being more recognition focused. I'd like to make some suggestions as you work on that policy. 2 suggestions. One is formalize our commitment to the board showing up to the partner appreciation event every year.
Partner appreciation,
Like,
okay.
do something that formalizes that we will be part of that and that the board will take time to appreciate. We're always invited to it, or we have been until COVID, and then it got weird. I don't know.
Do I even remember? Do I remember
I
that
think
event?
you've been to it.
I'm pretty sure I have, but I don't remember it.
But anyway, that's
yeah.
one thing. The second thing is that by being a member of Eastside Pathways, they truly are barely a backbone organization, and they're no longer like in the past they might have implied that they were the voice for everything or whatever, or maybe we misunderstood what they meant to be. But I feel like they're working to elevate. So there are about 70 to 100 partner organizations.
A lot.
And they are bringing, Eastside Pathways is bringing the vast majority of them together. And so by being on that, we have an opportunity to have that level of exposure and contact to those organizations in a way that's really powerful.
What do they call that meeting? It's not all hands, is it all partners?
There is an all-partner meeting coming up next week. It's a 2-hour event I'm going to on Tuesday evening. But that's not the event where you really, like, there are different things throughout the year. And again, like, you meet with the executive director of Eastside Pathways, but you also go to events and they have workshops and you talk to other groups. And then they also have these cans, these something network, blah, blah, blah. But they're action networks where there's a whole group of partners that get together under a particular interest, like whether it's preschool education or communications with the Spanish-speaking community or whatever. And the partners who are all contributing in some way to that work, they all get together and they do something. So I think that rather than us trying to formalize and maintain an equitable and current and inclusive set of those, there's already organizations that are doing that and mechanisms in place. So one is the district's partnership event. The other is Eastside Pathways. There may be others that you find. I would leverage those to get touch. And then think about those organizations that either A, have broadest touch, or maybe not even broad, but like high numbers, broad touch.
Can I ask you a question? Are you still talking within the ambit of, I got a little lost, within the ambit of Eastside Pathways?
No,
you're
now
just
I'm
saying in
moving out.
general?
So now,
Okay.
But I was
Eastside
thinking
Pathways.
Jane and I would have to come up with some way of what you're getting at right now, prioritizing or
Yeah,
figuring
I
out.
think you're giving kind of metrics of what
Yeah.
we might use to put
For
in
the
the
rest of
bucket.
them. So like we've got Eastside Pathways, we've got this thing we can plug into with the district's partnership appreciation. Maybe that's enough instead of trying to do our own additional system of managing every single one of these organizational relationships. And then in addition to that, we still maintain relationships with PTSA. And if we tried to drop that, you would be like, no, we shouldn't do that. They hate every kid, right? Like, so there's some criteria that's floating a few of them to the top. You might just think about articulating those criteria a little bit so that we know which ones. Because I think that Rainier Athletes, Jubilee Reach, PTSA, special needs, PTSA, we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our kids, and in many cases thousands, right? So I just maybe think about what your criteria are.
Yeah.
One thing I do just want to underscore is I think the point you started with, which is make it work for you, is important because I do think also some of these places mainly want to have a point of contact. Like if I need something, if I want to update you, I have your mobile phone and you're my point of contact on the board. I can contact you. And that took me a while to realize that. Now, you think like is a little different. They kind of want you physically at their meetings. And I think I've enjoyed it more this time than I did maybe the first time because I think I understand what they want a little better. But I've learned not to stay for the whole meetings. I used to stay for the 2+ hours, and then I would find I really did feel pretty irrelevant for for the last 3/4 of the meeting. But I will say I think that's important because otherwise, if it becomes that because they would like you to show up and stay for the entire meeting, you feel like you must, then you may feel like you can't do it at all, or it might be something kind of that just you're not able to last. So I feel like there's that balance. What would they like in a perfect world? What can you give? And then what would at least meet their needs? And that might be depending on the group. But anyway.
That's why I was thinking of having almost like a checklist and then talking to them and like, okay, this group can do with recognition and this group wants a point of contact, but this group really wants us, yeah, and then split it that way.
And I do think sometimes they offer because they're trying to be inclusive.
But
So
they
they're
don't
like,
really-
but they don't necessarily expect you to come.
So both
right?
things, like what do you really need and what's above and beyond. But yes, I don't like driving across town to be at somebody's meeting for 20 minutes and then get dismissed. That was not a happy thing.
Director Aris, you haven't had a chance to talk about your interests in.
We actually didn't also finish, like
Oh,
Carolyn
I'm sorry.
gave us
Okay,
her
yeah,
theory,
keep
but
going,
she
keep
didn't
going.
talk
Yeah.
about her other stuff.
Oh yeah, well, you know that I always want to do PTSA, one form or another, and I've sort of been pinch hitting this year when Joyce couldn't make it and there was some confusion. So that's what I always like. And I wasn't it this year. According to the memo, I was, but I wasn't.
Okay, so are you saying you also would like to do PTSA?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's nothing prohibiting, but I mean, I guess right now we just have the interest from both of you. And then.
Yeah, I think like I'm asking for it because it's the only one that I am
You've
able
never
to
done.
do.
Oh, and you'd want to do. Yeah, okay.
Because I
think that's
can't
fair.
do a couple of them because I just finished my term.
Fair.
And
Yeah.
other people have asked to have their second term in the other ones.
That's totally fair.
So.
Okay, understand. I'm not trying to assign tonight. I thought we would just, though, state our clear, like, interest. Do you have more, Carolyn, or have you covered your interests? Because I'd otherwise like to move to Director Juarez.
I think we should move along.
Okay.
Let's see. I would like to continue to be the alternative for the ledge rep. I feel like there's still a lot of learning that I'd like to do in that space, and also work with Christine with all the efforts that she's put in, especially around the special education space. That said, I actually think, as much as I enjoy being the ledger for special education or special needs BTSA, I'm wondering if I should take a step back, and if you're interested, Christine, for you to take that space with all the work that you're doing right now. I'm
open to it, but I don't need to take that. Like, I'm glad to have more than one of us have that voice.
Yeah.
Can you turn on your mic?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't need to take that on, but I'm open to it. And I know I like the more people that are tuned into our families, the better. I think Carolyn makes an effort in that space as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I could step aside and just be a member in that space, and that would be okay with me, because I think as long as I could, still engage and listen. Let's see, Eastside Pathway, since it's open, I'm actually be interested in that one. If there are other spaces that needs to be filled and needs a person, I'm willing to fill in.
What about Bellevue Schools Foundation? Does that interest you?
I could do that, but Joyce is the alternate, and since she's not here, I don't want to overstep.
Okay.
I want to let her take that on if she wants to. If she does not, I could definitely step in that space as well. As far as the vice president's space, this is your second year, Carolyn, right? Yeah. So it has to be filled by someone else?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I really like doing it, but I think that's right.
Okay. In that case,
if, if we need somebody, I could consider that. Unless there are other people that also are interested as well.
I did ask Director Shui if she had anything that I could share for tonight based on the agenda. And so we have a protocol now where we can communicate by teams if our board coordinator is on there, and I did not hear back. So I don't have any kind of interests to be able to share. So to your point, I don't know if there's any other interest.
Okay.
So I also am having Hannah like jot stuff down, but I'm taking notes too. So what I heard was you're open to vice president. You're also open to continuing as a backup ledge rep. Am I right? And I also heard that you're open to BSF, but you wouldn't want to take it if Joyce was also, because she's been the alternate. You're amenable to East Side Pathways. You like special ed PTSA, but you recognize that Director Chu or Vice President Watson might also be interested. And I think that covers it. Did I get that, or did I miss something?
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
Rainier
Well,
Athletes,
well,
you
Rainier
continue with
Athletes,
that.
I would like to continue that one for sure.
Okay. And we will appropriately elevate that at the right time. And I am understanding, because you said before, so we crossed it out, Eastside School Directors has run its course, so you said it's disbanded. Okay, so I think with that, I know we have a hard stop, but I would like just a few minutes for director discussion. Yes, Superintendent?
Just a quick thank you. I think if we have any public listening, these are volunteer positions that you serve in the board, and I watch the pressure that comes at you to try to touch base with our beautiful community and all the people that are trying to do good, but it also stretches you thin. And as I hear this exchange, I just want to express on behalf of the district and as a superintendent, say thank you to all of you for the work that you do and the liaisons that go well beyond the board. So thank you.
Yes, that's a thank you to all of us. So thank you. Yeah, we all can say, I think we all enjoy it, but I will say it's the extra layer you don't quite realize, but it does bring a lot of context that you don't have otherwise. So I think, can I suggest maybe we at least just take each a minute or two for at least some thoughts. We don't have the 30 minutes we'd hoped for, and we're over 6:15, but I think it's worth, we want to start with Director Chu and just kind of go down a minute or so each on just thoughts. Okay. I'll go first. I will just say I really enjoyed our Interlake High School visit. I did think it was, it was a pretty intense discussion, but I also was impressed at our principal for making a concerted effort to bring in people who were going to give what he knew, I assume, pretty hard feedback, but I valued that. The other thing I guess I would just say that I think is a moment of celebration, that, what do you call it, the Day of the Dead celebration that was partly done with Latino Heat and Youth Eastside Services was a really good event. It was really well attended, and they talked about it also last night at Youth Link. It was just a great event, and I was impressed by a lot of things. One was the turnout. The other was how much time people had put into preparing the ofredas and the other things. But then also there was a huge camera crew there and from the district, and it was just very well supported. So I would just say that was a really positive moment. Vice President Watson?
I guess, yeah, I went to the Latino Heat event as well, and in addition to what CMS saw, two things really struck me. One was very sad. On one of the ofrendas that was done by the Latino Heat group, there were quite a number of young people who had died, whose pictures were on the ofrenda, and that just made me sad and made me wonder if there's a disproportionality there that we should, I don't know what we could do to address it, but it's something we need to think about. And then on a happier note, I connected with the Stevenson, a friend there, there was somebody there whose name I'm forgetting, so I feel really bad, who I'm going to reach out to again and try to connect up and see actually what PTSA can do for Stevenson, because as you may know, state PTSA is suggesting that the PTA at Stevenson is disbanded for lack of viability.
Dr. Aris?
Well, let's see, there's multiple things I to kind of talk through. I appreciate the engagement that we had at Interlake High School, especially the vulnerability that the students shared and sharing their truth with us, and the staff willing to sit there and hear it all and take it in. So I very much appreciate that. It says something about the efforts that they're putting in, its impact around social, emotional, mental health, that they've created that space. So kudos to them. The special ed PTSA had their general meeting yesterday, and that the director of special education did a presentation, which I thought was fantastic. I wish we recorded it, because I think it would have been a great resource for just community at large, as well as the revision of the PTSA website, or I think version of in our website. I think making it more user-friendly, I think community really appreciate that as well. And the third thing I kind of want to, actually there's four, but the third thing I wanted to kind of, my brain's been mulling over is the shooting in Seattle and its impact on our staff. And I really do hope that we are taking the time to grieve. And reflect and see how we could really address the sense of belonging and really kind of double down on that space. Sorry, it's just... That said, I was trying to think of how do we celebrate the good in our school. And I wondered if, as a school board, we could do something to lift the positives on a regular basis for the... I don't know how that it's going to look, but I would like for us to brainstorm and think about how do we support our staff and recognize them on a regular basis? And how do we recognize our students on a regular basis? Obviously, we have our students that come and share their stories, but can we do more? Can we do more in that space? So that's kind of a question I'd like to put out there. Yeah, that's it for now.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That was probably my single biggest thing I wanted to mention today. So I'll mention a few things. First, I want to say I heard a lot of inspiring stories about our high school students and many of our recent graduates and the lengths they went to get to the polls. And I am very excited to see the civic participation at the younger ages of our community. And I think there's a national movement for it, but it's also something that our teachers encourage. You don't meet a social studies teacher that doesn't encourage it, but I got to say, our Sammamish teachers in that area are so dedicated to civic engagement. They live, sleep, eat, breathe it. They give these opportunities to the kids, and I think you'll find that across our district. But I want to just celebrate that that our young people are voting, and that's a great thing. The second thing I want to call out is the school shooting that happened in Seattle. The tragedy is the student who died. The tragedy is the student who felt compelled to take such an action. The tragedy is also every other person in that community. I talked to a nearby district about the stress and trauma that their district had when they went into lockdown because of that issue. Like, as that shooter was leaving, it impacted the surrounding communities. And that district, had to go into lockdown, and all the children and all the families, when your kid is in a lockdown space, that's terrifying. That's traumatizing. And it's a place where we shouldn't be. So I think we have had a very persistent commitment in this district to advocating at the state and federal level for comprehensive school safety supports, including gun control. And I think we need to continue those efforts and maybe even enhance them. I wonder how we can connect with our young voters to do more of that advocacy. I wonder if one of the things that, as Carolyn and Jane talk, one of the things you might consider with our liaisonships is how might we elevate some of the students to participate in the board. I don't know if I'm excited personally about like 1 or 2 representatives on the board, because that's only 1 or 2 students. But when you have a whole student group that constantly has the ear of the board and they get to participate in different ways, like can they be part of our legislative delegation? Can they be part, whatever. So there's opportunities there that I think, and maybe they're not permanent parts, but some things to think about there. Because I want to take this school shooting and think like, yeah, we should have a moment just to acknowledge those impacted directly and those in this industry, in our community, who are impacted every day by fears and the work that they do to avoid such things. And then we should take some action. Thoughts and prayers and reflection are great. Actions are also important. And I thought the third thing I'd like to touch on, which kind of brings all of this together, is the feedback we had from our Interlake students here tonight and at the thing. I spent hours trying to figure out what to do with their feedback, because one of the things that I struggle with on a regular basis is we elevate the voices of our community. We're hearing them more and more. That is awesome. We need to stop hearing the same things. We need to actually make changes so that people feel like elevating their voices has purpose and doesn't feel hopeless. So I have been thinking about some specific things we can do policy-wise, so I'm going to go back and follow up, maybe independent of the group, to put some straw pieces on the table that might inform some of the work that gets done. But I do think that the work ultimately must be informed and driven by our community. So I will look into that. But for social emotional health, we need to continue the work that we're doing. But one thing that I did come up with is we really need to create community, not with extra things, but in the spaces where we have community. There's no one better at doing that than our elementary teachers, right? Like, they bring you in, you know each other's names, you have places, you have roles, you're there all day. Our high school and middle school students just rev through and rev through and rev through. I wonder if there's a place in policy for us to talk about the critical nature of everyone learning each other's name and having some kind of like, and also one of the things I hear about over and over and over again is, yeah, I wasn't a freshman when I started, or I started in the middle of the year and didn't really know anyone. And like, so how can we keep people, like, one of the simplest things to forming community is knowing people's name and addressing them by it and not being uncomfortable with it. The other story we hear all the time is, oh yeah, they mispronounced my name. The teacher, the adult, the other student called me by someone else's name who has my same profile, like constantly. And one of the things they did in Highline a long time ago was know every student by name, strength, and need. And I don't think that should be our sole, like, I don't think that's enough. But I sure think it's a starting place. And I wonder what we could do in policy, and I wonder what the district might think about in terms of ensuring that in every single classroom, everyone knows everyone's name and is comfortable with that name, is conversant enough to say that name without discomfort. How could we change things, and what could we do with policy to support that without making it feel like a burden? Because those kids, they shouldn't have those stories. And the more we humanize each other, names and communication and interaction humanize, and they make it harder to do those things to one another. So I'm thinking about that a lot, and I'm going to explore whether or not I have a place to recommend in policy. So that's what I've got for today. There are smaller things and there are other things, but I think those are the important things.
Thank you. This was a really great discussion, and I think a lot of it, I'm hoping we can continue. I do want to, but I'm glad we did take the time. I want to suggest we take 5-minute to 10-minute break, and then we recess to our study session. We're going to be joined shortly, as we talked the other day, by Dr. Ellsbury. But thank you. So, all right, we take a 10-minute break. We start. I'm going to say it's 6:40 because my goal is we go into the Baker room. That we not be here much past what we had planned, which was 8 o'clock. Okay. And tonight's meeting is ended at 8:55 p.m. Thank you. We're adjourned.